Now, if you're not ready, then go ahead and tell me you're not ready.
I object to you getting records. You've been intrusive into people's personal lives.
I'm not a lawyer, but I'm not a lawyer, but
The Debrief.
hello and welcome to another episode of I'm Not a Lawyer, but
The Debrief.
I am Melanie, aka I'm Not a Lawyer, but I messed that all up, and I'm joined by my co-host.
Goosebay, how y'all doing?
We are not lawyers or legal experts or any of the above, but we spend a lot of time looking into those kind of things, researching those things. And every now and again, we have guests join us on this podcast to tell you about things we are interested in, but maybe
Yes.
don't know about. And so they are the experts that can do that. And so today is another guest episode. I'm a fan of guest episodes. They make me happy. So I'm going to bring our guests up. We have
Yes.
Chelsea and Stacy from the Jane Doe project joining us today. Hello, and thank you for being here.
Hey.
So we want to jump right in because we have a ton of questions. I was not completely familiar with it, obviously, and just doing research and having the brief conversations that we've had. Have a lot of questions and want to understand what exactly it is. So first, maybe we'll start with you, Chelsea, and then go to Stacy. You guys can introduce yourselves and then talk about what the DNA Doe project is and kind of what your role is there.
Okay, I'll go first. My name's Chelsea Hanrahan. I'm a librarian in my real life at New England College in Henniker, New Hampshire. And I've been volunteering for the DNA Doe project about 2 years now. And then I'll hand it over to Stacy and we can talk about what I do.
My name is Stacy Mitchell, and I am a grandma. And I have been with the DNA Doe project for about 7 years, and I'm a team lead.
Oh, wow. Okay. So talk about, maybe Stacy, tell us more about what is a team lead at the DNA Doe project, and then like what is the mission? How did it start? Like what is it exactly?
The mission is, I should read this from something.
It doesn't have to be exact.
It's basically to return the names to people who have been found and are being called John or Jane Doe, to return their names to their families to get them properly identified.
So when people die and police and law enforcement are not able to identify who they are, name and all of that kind of stuff, they are then called a Jane Doe if it's a female and then a John Doe if it's a male. And so after that happens, if there's no identification, that's just kind of what they're known as. And then the DNA Doe project, you guys come in on certain cases and certain instances and help to identify who they are. Did I capture that properly?
Yes.
Okay. And so what do you do as a team lead? What does that mean for what you do?
That is just basically guiding people what to. It'd probably be easier to understand if I explained a little bit of what we did. We have their DNA, and it has to be uploaded into GEDmatch or somewhere similar. The main sites where people do testing do not allow it.
Okay.
We find their relatives who have opted in, and we build their trees out to find common ancestors. And when we find common ancestors and then we find a marriage between them, we can build down to find who in that family is most likely and might not have been heard from in some time. Sometimes it's a very long time. So what the team lead does is basically like, okay, here is this person, figure this out, build their tree, this is this, just basic guidance. And then,
So when the person is found, are you waiting for somebody to then reach out to say, hey, this person is missing, or are you just off top just get the ball rolling and start trying to figure out who this person is?
When the person is found, typically that is either law enforcement or a medical examiner tries to find out who the person is. So they can do that through missing person reports. They'll see if somebody matches. They can do it through CODIS DNA and see if somebody matches. Fingerprints, if those are available, sometimes there is not enough available for them to do all of that. When they cannot identify the person, then they can contact the DNA Doe project.
Okay.
And get the next steps on getting the DNA, getting the file uploaded to GEDmatch, FTDNA, where it's allowed to be searched for people who have opted in. Pardon me.
Okay. Because I definitely have more questions on that, but I just want to understand another point because you guys both mentioned things that you do outside of the DNA Doe project. And so this organization, you guys are volunteers to this?
Yeah,
that's correct.
Okay. And so what made you want to be interested or get interested? Like, how did you even get involved with the organization?
Well, I can talk for myself. So I was a mother of a small child during COVID. So I'm a librarian in my real life, so I enjoy doing research and a various amount of nerdy activities like genealogy. So I was already well into this. And I've always been really interested in true crime. So during COVID, and this is a relatively new technology, it only started being used in 2018. So it's, it was basically created, if anyone's familiar with the podcast Bear Brook about identifying some people that were found, unfortunately murdered in my home state of New Hampshire and trying to identify them. And also with the Golden State Killer, which some of you might be familiar with. Those were the first cases that genetic genealogy was used at with a law enforcement kind of purpose for it.
Okay.
So, I'm sitting at home during COVID, basically during this time, my brain is melting with my small child at home. And I'm like, I should do something. Yeah, instead of, spending $300 on dumb stuff that I didn't need, I thought, well, you know what, why don't I take a class? There was a small class that was available at the time. Now there's a lot more options, but I took this class. I really liked it. Started working and volunteering with another organization, and then that kind of ended. I was lucky enough to have a person in the state that is the forensic anthropologist for our state. And those are some of the people that do the examinations of those unidentified human remains or John and Jane Doe's. And so she was actually starting to work for the state of New Hampshire with the DNA Doe project. And so she kind of just brought me along and I kind of came in on the coattails of someone else. But it is all entirely the genetic genealogy that we do is all volunteer based, and the genetic genealogy piece of it through DNA Doe project never costs law enforcement any money for us to do that.
Oh, wow. And so Stacey, I think you were saying, so does law enforcement reach out to you guys? That is how the cases come to you. It's not you guys saying, hey, we want to help with this. They're saying, hey, maybe this case is cold. We need help. Can we use your services? Is that how it works?
That is how it works. They need to reach out. And there are people who will reach out to law enforcement agencies and say, hey, please contact them. Look at all this stuff they've done. But we don't reach out to law enforcement. They reach us, and we have some wonderful law enforcement partners.
Got it. Okay. And so were you going to ask something?
Yes. Is there ever a point where you don't have a body and they want you all to look for the missing person?
No. Okay. We only do the investigative genetic genealogy portion.
Okay.
I think most of us are involved with missing person cases where we, share the information as much as possible and, look at things like that. But as DNA Doe project, no, we are not involved in that piece at all.
Okay.
One of the things we do use as part of it, although I've never actually been on a case where someone that we've identified has actually been reported missing. Like they've always just been someone that is not, like, there's, you know, a bunch of different reasons why people become John and Jane Does or unidentified. It could be just they lost touch with their family. You know, sometimes it's a, you know, violent homicide, and their remains were just found. Sometimes we're talking about like historical remains, so there's not anyone around, or they might have lost their family early, so there's not anyone to really notice that they're not coming around or calling as much. But there is a national database, but because we live in the US, right, we have 50 different states, and so they all have different laws. So the national database, it's really up to each state what they want to put into the database. So some states will be very good and put all of their unidentified human remains in there, and some don't. Some just have really historical ones. So sometimes you don't know exactly what, you know, is out there, or if someone just didn't make it into the database, or maybe the dates are off. And as Stacy can probably tell you, every time we take on a case, there's always like 4 or 5 mini mysteries within the case, it seems to be like, where you have to figure out, like, maybe someone was adopted, maybe their DNA isn't really adding up to what they're saying their tree says. And so we kind of have to figure out, you know, what's going on there. There's a lot of times where the dad is living across the street and not necessarily the dad that's on the tree at the time.
I know you mentioned Jed or something, but this sounds like what's happening with what's the
Ancestry.
Yeah, like Ancestry.com, where people are like finding out their relatives and like, oh, you're not my mama or my daddy. But that's what it sounds like.
That's exactly it, kind of like. So we are, so the test that you take, and this is part we want to make clear, because this is probably the number one reason that people don't want to participate in any sort of databases. So as genetic genealogists and law enforcement, Ancestry, 23andMe, like the big ones that do DNA companies, we cannot submit a profile to those companies, like, because their terms of service say like, no way, no how, we're concerned about the privacy thing. But there were a group of people that were doing these ancestry tests, and a lot of people, in particular, people that were adopted, were like early adopters of using these DNA tests to find out who their birth family were. And so there were a lot of people that wanted the ability to take the test that they had done in an Ancestry or 23andMe and put it into something like a third party, where you're signing up and agreeing that your DNA is going into this particular database, and you've agreed that it's going to be run against everybody in that database.
Yeah.
So we only use Ancestry and the public records features. And if you have a public tree, we might be, you know, creeping on that, or a Facebook profile, but we can't actually use the DNA profiles within Ancestry. We can't just say like, this belongs to Jane Doe number 1, and then upload it and pretend it's like our aunt or something.
Okay.
It's only this one that's the third party, or there's 2.5 almost now. So there's GEDmatch, which is just the big one, where everyone who puts their DNA profile, it's the raw file from your 23andMe, where it's just kind of the text and the data, you upload it, same thing as you would, the Ancestry would, and it goes into this bigger database. You've agreed that that's what's happening, and because this was a relatively new technology, they actually added to their terms of service that, like, an additional layer where you're agreeing that your DNA can be tested for these law enforcement cases.
Okay.
So you definitely have to give like a couple layers of permissions for us to get there. So we're not going in there and like hacking the mainframe to get your Ancestry stuff. We can only use GEDmatch, FTDNA, and there's recently a new one that we're kind of involved with. It's called DNA Justice, but that doesn't show up. It's just you're asking to submit your DNA to this particular database.
But so what you're saying is that it's an echo for me. Is it echo for anybody else? No?
I can hear the echo.
Okay. What you're saying is that we like a regular lay person has to opt into this. So I've never heard of GEDmatch. I've never heard of I've heard of 23andMe and Ancestry. And so if those are the things I've heard of, how do people find out that, oh, I should upload my DNA to this site in the event there's someone unidentified that could be related to me. Is that probably the hardest part of what you guys do? Is there's not people uploaded?
The hardest part is people are not uploading and opting in, because there is like a little switch on there where you have to opt in for us to be able to see you. If you're not opted in, it's still just like Ancestry or 23andMe, where you can compare like your ancestry. If you tested at Ancestry, you can compare to people that tested at 23andMe without testing at both, because neither allow uploads.
Got it.
So wherever you tested, you can upload it there and opt in. It will say opt into law enforcement, I think, is something like that.
Okay.
And you have to actually click that and read the terms of service always. And then we will be able to see if you match a John or Jane Doe. And most people know about it if they were already doing genealogy. There are a lot of Facebook pages where people discuss genetic genealogy.
Okay.
And so that would be where people were in GEDmatch to begin with.
Okay.
And then after the changes in terms of service and such, some people did choose to completely leave. Some people chose to not opt in. And some people actually take their test and put it on there because they've seen it on a podcast or in an article that says this is how this happened.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, sometimes those things get it wrong and they say that it's Ancestry or 23andMe, but it's not. There's no way to do it.
All right. So if you're listening, opt in. If you want to be a part of, having your DNA uploaded and potentially being related to somebody who's unidentified, like this could be helpful. Go ahead.
Well, I'm that skeptic person.
I understand.
Is there identity theft or anything I need to worry about opting in and providing all of this information to you all to
opting in?
Somebody, I don't know, becomes me.
We have to be very careful.
Okay.
I'll let you talk about opting in, and then I'll talk about maybe the security stuff that we have to do on our end.
Yes.
Opting in is not really different from uploading to GEDmatch, and I would read the terms of service. Your email does actually show, so that if you have a relative that wants to say, hey, we had the same great grandma, do you want to discuss it? They can get a hold of you. I can't say that with that information it's impossible for it. I do think that they try and do whatever they can on their end to keep it safe. But your email address that you use will be visible to the public. And they have gone to where I think it used to be visible to anybody who visited the site. I think now you actually have to also have your DNA uploaded. I'm not positive.
Oh, got it.
I would check the terms of service, because I'm not positive, because everybody I know is uploaded and opted in because they're all like, oh, this is cool. Yeah. Hey, do you just want my DNA? Because I don't want to deal with it. Yes, I do. Thank you.
On our end, as people that have access to kits that we can compare against other people's DNA, the DNA Doe Project is really strict about like two-factor authentication. We have to have all of that. We have like dedicated email things and procedures where we have to shut things down. You can't, add a password and forget it and have it saved on your computer. It's you have to type that out every time, and it's one of those long jumbled up letters and numbers passwords that you're not going to like remember or guess.
Yes.
And we actually have it's a pretty lean organization, but we do have somebody that's in charge of internet operations and making sure things are secure, because it is so important. Because if something were to leak, then I feel like there already are so many skeptics that just loses more credibility anyway.
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons that we love to do stuff like this is that we want to raise awareness of that this exists. Which, if you like genealogy, it's a fun way to find like a bunch of people and what your family is, or if you have like what we call a brick wall where you've been tracing your family and maybe you can't go any further. One of the things that we're seeing a lot of now is people, from African American backgrounds are using it as well, because there's so many brick walls in their ancestry that DNA is really one of the only ways to do that.
Yeah.
To break through and kind of get an idea of what your lineage is, if that's something that you're interested in.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we have to make sure it's pretty secure.
I was actually going to ask that, if I don't know if you guys had any data, but I was going to ask if you see that if there is a lack of African American or Black people uploading their DNA. I would imagine that to be the case, and so just the awareness and to Greg's point about skepticism and all of that. However, on the flip side to what the point you're making, Chelsea, there is an interest in wanting to know the background, right? Wanting to know my own background, because there is so many blocks in the history of Black people in America. But knowing that something like this exists could be useful in that way. So yeah.
Is there a region?
Actually, minorities in general upload less than, like, you have 4 grandparents from Europe. You're more likely to want to know where each of those grandparents were, their story. If you are a minority, you might be a little more skeptical of, do I want law enforcement looking at me any further? Yeah. I know a lot of people that are Jewish are like, yeah, I don't want that information out there.
Yeah.
Most of my earlier cases weren't, but all of the cases I'm on now are Hispanic cases.
Oh, interesting.
And it's very difficult because of the lack of trust, the skepticism, and also a lot of endogamy.
Say more about endogamy.
Endogamy is a major pedigree collapse. Pedigree collapse is when you have your parents are related to each other in some way. So it could be like your 4th great grandmother on one side is your 5th great grandmother on the other side. And that is pedigree collapse.
It's a lot of like, if you're living in a region and you have a neighbor and like some other families in your town, like let's say 1860, you're not traveling like 5 states away to meet your wife or your husband. So you're marrying like your next door neighbor. And then maybe the next generation, you're marrying that person's marrying their next door neighbor, and you're all kind of related. And so when it goes into the database like that, what it does is make you look a lot more closely related than you actually might be. So we see it a lot with like I have Jewish DNA, and so like I'm related to like every Jewish case in the world, but like I'm not that closely related to them. Like we wouldn't really match up, but just some little part of our DNA is because they just remarried and married each other all in the same kind of century.
Interesting.
It can be from a location. If somebody is from, say, an island, yeah, they only had people within that island to marry. Eventually, you're related to everybody on that island.
Got it.
It can be for religious reasons. Jewish people marry other Jewish people. They Mennonites marry other Mennonites. I don't believe too many Amish people actually do their DNA. I don't think any do, but they would be very, very endogamous.
Got it.
So yeah, there can be different reasons for that, but it does make it more difficult.
So interesting. I mean, the historical context, it sounds like, is what you guys also have to be familiar with. You have to understand who you're dealing with or who you're researching, but the background, and because all of that stuff matters. So that's so interesting. What? I want to get into their cases, but go ahead.
The island situation, that makes plenty sense.
It does. If you're on a literal island, who's there is that makes
yeah. If you have like Hawaii or Puerto Rico, there's not much place to go for somebody that's not related to you. It might be distant relationships, but when it goes on where you're related to each other, and then your children are related to each other, and their children are related to each other, and it goes on for several generations, it gets a lot more difficult. And we have also had cases where we've dealt with people who are matches where their parents were closely related to each other. And that's kind of even a different, that's a different thing when parents are closely related, because you're going to get DNA from the same
Yeah, you're gonna run
ancestors
into a wall, right?
through both. So
Yeah.
it's
It
homogeneous DNA.
Oh,
looking
that's
like
interesting.
it's very like yeah. Okay. Well, okay. Let's go into an example case so that we can kind of put some what you guys are talking about, like have some real examples. So maybe we start. I don't know if either one of you want to start. Maybe we start with Stacy because we're going with the early case for the DNA Doe project. So can you talk about this case? It's the first case for DNA Doe, right?
It was the first case for investigative genetic genealogy. It came
Okay.
out a couple weeks before the Golden State Killer case came
Okay.
out. So it
Okay.
was the very first time that it was proven that it could be used.
Okay.
And he was known as Joseph Newton Chandler III as he was found because he had assumed somebody else's identity and he committed suicide, but he had lived for years and years under that identity. And when he passed, they were like, wait, this isn't, no. And
Oh,
so they were trying to figure out who he was. And he had a considerable amount of money in his bank account. So they were thinking that he was possibly a mastermind criminal or something. Like, who is
hmm.
this person?
Yeah.
And it it took a while. And when some previous DNA work had been done where they did his Y DNA, and that came back to a probable last name, which was definitely similar to his actual birth last name.
Okay.
And when investigative genetic genealogy started, we're like, okay, this is what we have. And we were just kind of just a few people going,
Mm-hmm.
okay, let's do this and let's figure out if this can be done. Because at the time, we didn't know if it was possible because the DNA is degraded.
Hmm.
So it doesn't come up the same as if you spit in a tube and take a test at Ancestry or 23andMe. There is degradation in the DNA. Some of the cases are very, very old, and so there's a lot more degradation in it. But
So,
How are you pulling the DNA off of bone?
well, I was gonna say, wait. Let me just give a little bit of context, because I think what I'm gonna say I think will help lead up to that anyway.
Okay.
So it's Joseph Newton Chandler. He commits suicide. What year is it? 2002. I
hmm,
have my Google up here. Let me so that
okay,
you don't know off the top of your head. Yeah. Okay. So it says July 23rd, 2002. So he commits suicide. He's found.
yes,
And he's been going under this identity of Joseph Newton Chandler III,
yes.
and he has all this money, but when he dies there's no what I don't know if you know the answer to this, but what makes police realize that this is not Joseph Newton Chandler III?
I am not positive. I
Okay.
believe they did.
They
I don't.
probably pulled records or something, I think, when they were probably trying to like contact somebody
Okay.
maybe about what was going on. But
Yeah,
you'll
I
see, like, yeah, sometimes someone
the-
just does, it was a lot easier to fake your identity back in the day. You just had to
Yeah.
walk in there and get some cards. So I'm
Yeah.
sure they probably were trying to verify something before they gave all this money away, and we're a little like, okay.
and
Because he has the money, so they're trying to figure out who's next, who takes this money now, but
yes,
this is not Joseph Newton Chandler III.
right. They found that Joseph Newton Chandler III, with that birth date, had passed away in Texas when he was 8 years old.
Oh my gosh.
You
I
knew
believe
that
that
one.
was the case.
So
He was,
he's assumed this identity.
yes,
And so because they know now that that's you're not Joseph Newton Chandler, he is then named a John Doe.
yes,
Okay. And then so what I see here is in 2014 is when I don't know if that's when you guys came on the case or are contacted, but it says in 2014 at the request of police. This you guys do your magic.
I believe that is when they did the Y DNA testing to come up with a last name.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm pretty sure that is
Okay.
when Y DNA started. And they did come up with a last name. It was
Okay. So this is like 12 years later, and so you have this last name. So then what is you guys' process? What do you do?
Our process at the time was a bit different because, like I said, this was brand new.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe all of us had worked adoption cases trying to find adopted people's birth parents.
Uh-huh.
So, just in a very similar way, we started building trees and trying to find where there were common ancestors. And then when you find a common ancestor, you okay, and build down and try and figure out who the person might be.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, our process of even doing that was a bit different in the very beginning. We have done so many cases, we have sort of gotten a better method of all of the little, there's a lot of work and research that goes into it.
Uh-huh.
And I feel we have gotten better at having one way for everybody to do the research and
Mm-hmm.
build the trees. And there are a lot more tools available to us now, too.
Got it.
When we first started, there were not things to tell us. We had a little chart that we could put up in front of us, and we called it the green chart. And it tells you basically, like, if you're a parent-child relationship, how much DNA is the minimum you will share, how much you'll typically share. You know, if you're second cousins twice removed, what that is. There were not quick, easy applications online. And I know I always had my little green chart just sitting there for
Mm-hmm.
my own genealogy, for adoption cases, and definitely for this. And that is, those charts do not count for any kind of pedigree collapse or endogamy.
Got it.
The only thing it ever accounted for was double first cousins, because they appear more related because they have the same grandparents. So, like, if two brothers marry two sisters, when they each have sets of children, even though the parents aren't related to each other, the children are related more because they only have the same set of grandparents on both sides.
Got it.
With you saying that, what do you call it when twin brothers marry twin sisters and they have kids? Is that some type of
I don't think there's a.
collapse?
That is double first cousins, but the DNA for that, if they are identical twins and identical twins,
Mm-hmm.
the children would look like siblings through DNA.
Okay.
If they are fraternal twins, it's just the same as brother and sister.
Because they're just related by marriage. It wouldn't be right.
Directly related. You're right.
Okay.
Cool. So you guys do this process for
Oh,
Joseph
oh,
Newton.
Joseph. But how do you get the DNA out of the bones? How does that work?
Oh, you send them to a lab.
Okay.
That's an important thing to say. So, this in the first case that she's talking about, there was something that was, for lack of a better term, I'm going to say fresh. It was a fresh body.
Oh, okay. Cool.
If there's, like, let's say there's some bones out in the woods and that's how someone's remains were recovered, like, obviously those are going to be degraded depending on how long they've been out there. So they're sent to, like, a bioinformatics lab, and they have to try to extract the DNA. So we like leg bones, we like teeth. Those always have some good DNA in it. And sometimes they'll, I know, I'm very foolish.
You saying, I like leg bones, we like teeth bones. Yes. It's hilarious. Okay, go ahead.
I know. People don't invite me over to eat for dinner, but it will definitely like have it go to a lab. So that first case, I believe they had to kind of really chase labs down, didn't they, to kind of do this process because it was so new?
It was an unknown completely. They had to find a lab that said, okay, we will try this for you. And the lab was like, this is not going to work. You're not going to get anything from this. But since you think that maybe we can, we will try it for you. And now labs have they they've grown exponentially as well that do this.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, all the labs were like, no. And they were lucky enough to find one person that said, you know what? I'll give it a try. And I don't recall, I honestly do not recall if they used his femur or if they used his teeth.
Oh, wow.
And basically took a little piece, pulverized it to extract the DNA.
Uh-huh.
And in that case, it worked. And they were able to go through bioinformatics and make a file that looks similar to what you would receive from Ancestry or 23andMe with the autosomal information to compare to other people.
Got it.
Find who he was.
And so his name has learned to actually be Robert Ivan Nichols?
Yes.
That's insane.
Yes. And his son was extremely helpful. He gave his DNA proof that we were correct.
You guys contacted him to give it like, hey, I think this might be your family member. Can we get your DNA? Oh, that's what happened?
Well, and we don't ever contact the immediate family members. That is something the law enforcement does.
Oh, got it.
But yes. And they said, okay, this group of people seem to think that this person might have been your father. And he was like, oh, wow, that's cool. I haven't seen him in, like.
So did the son know about his father and his father went missing, or?
Yes, I believe it's all public. His father was in World War II.
This guy we're talking about in World War II.
Yes.
Okay.
And he came home to his family, and then he just got up and dismissed his family. And I think it was a couple years later, he sent his son a penny in an envelope. And that was the last time anybody in his family had heard from him. And his parents were still around at the time as well.
Oh, my goodness.
And everybody knew he was missing. And he just disappeared from their life. He changed his identity and left.
Wow.
Isn't that insane?
It's just a theory, but because obviously we can't know exactly why he did anything. But he was involved in something in World War II that I think now we would say, oh, he has PTSD. And I don't believe that they really had help for that at that time. And
I'm
so
sure they didn't.
Yeah, they just.
So, and then he had a lot of money in the bank. Did they kind of figure out where the money came from, or?
He had a good job.
Oh.
He was living in, I don't remember if it was a studio or a 1-bedroom apartment in Ohio. He had just saved money because he wasn't, he wasn't out trying to date somebody or marry somebody or buy things. He had a nice, decent car. He rented an apartment, and apparently he just saved the money. They don't think he committed any crimes other than the fraud, identity theft.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So fascinating.
I would want to go down a rabbit hole to really find his footsteps.
I know, to
what
understand
were you
his
really
life.
doing?
Yeah, that's fascinating.
That is something that we really, a lot of things come out about that type of thing when we're researching. And then that is up to the family what gets shared publicly.
That's very interesting.
Okay, and then the other case, I didn't know if were you about to add something? Sorry, Stacey, I didn't mean to.
No.
The other case, Chelsea. This is one, Chelsea, you worked on, Diane Miner.
Oh yeah, okay. I can just jump in if you want.
Yeah, please.
So the case that I have worked for DDP, most recently that was announced that I can talk about, is one called Jane Doe. This was a woman that was found in 1998 in Nashville, Tennessee. She was in the Cumberland River. They were surprised that she went unidentified because she actually had some characteristics. So you can tell a lot about someone, like, if they get their hair done, if they have highlights in their hair, like they're probably not, living in a homeless shelter, maybe like they have money. Their nails are really taken care of. She has good dentals. She was wearing the reason she has nickname Jane Doe is because she had a zodiac necklace of the Leo lion. So that can either be a clue, or that could just be, something that she likes to wear. Could be whatever. It's turned out before where things found with them are not even related at all. But no one came forward. I think in 1998, they did do the best they could try to publicize this, and it just never happened. There was actually another podcast that kind of like picked up the hunt that focuses on unidentified human remains, called The Fall Line, if anyone likes stories about this.
Yeah.
And she Laura Norton, she kind of ran with it, and it was kind of trying to republicize this case. This was one of the cases. So we did the DNA extraction. I believe it went to a couple other agencies. Like, I think Nashville tried to do the DNA in-house first, but it ended up being a sort of difficult case because of that word, endogamy. This was somebody that was primarily from the southern United States. And so, there's a lot of, pioneer times, there weren't so many people available to marry. So there were a lot of intermarriage between like the same 3 or 4 or 5 families. So you'll see the same names come over and over and over again. And it just, you're like, okay, this is really related. But I was lucky to have a really good team leader at the time who knows a lot more about the sort of like little high level DNA analysis. Like, I'm not a scientist. I'm a tree builder. I'm a researcher, but I don't know too much like about the DNA stuff. So I'll leave that to the people that are way better at it. But she had kind of gone through and picked out a few matches that she thought, this is probably not part of that group that are all in this one particular place in the South. This might be someone that it's not what we call necessarily a great match. So, you're not in the database going, oh, wow, I can't wait to explore this because it's so close. It's a very small amount that they share, but it did end up leading as when I built that match out. Eventually she was able to come back and sort of do that high level analysis, and one day she just sat down and was like, I'm going to solve it today. And so that's exactly what she did. And so it ended up being this woman named Diane Miner, which was one of the names that kept popping up several times. I said earlier, I've never been on a case where someone's been reported missing. And this was just the same. This was a woman who pretty much lived in this area for about 20, 30 years. She actually had a record contract at one point. Like, she was a beauty queen. She had lived this very full life. She had 2 daughters that lived in the area that I don't know the story there. They might've been estranged. A lot of things happen. Nobody's perfect and we all live a life, but I just was like shocked that she was never reported missing. But some people don't care to talk about that when they have these mysteries in their family. Some people are really private and they just don't go there. So we were able to sort of, track down the identity and then pass that off to law enforcement, because, I'll see things sometimes where it's like, these genetic genealogists are making up stuff online. Like, we're just providing like a tip, like anyone would we did the work, and here's what our tip is for you.
Yeah.
And now it's your kind of job to run with the ball and confirm that. So they ended up speaking with her family. And then sometimes on these cases, you don't hear, like, you might hear if it's confirmed from your team leader, and like, that's great. But sometimes you maybe don't know when they're going to announce that, and you might be called to do something or like talk about it. So one day I think I was on vacation at the beach with my family and found out that, like, oh, they announced this all today. So I better like be on call today. But that was, a long kind of standing one, and from 1998, which, sad to say, that's like almost 20 years ago now for someone that's that old. And so we have cases that are like that. And I don't know the circumstances of her family, but I have to imagine, like, if you haven't seen your relative, for 20 years, or somebody that you care about, you're probably wondering what happened and
Yeah.
where they went. And there was another case that I was on where a person was identified that she had gone missing after she had left one night to go to the grocery store and then just never came back. And for years, her kids assumed that she wanted to be gone and walked away from them.
Wow.
And, I creep on people's socials sometimes, because you have to sometimes verify details. So there is a reason for it.
Yes.
But her son was like, now I know, like, my mom didn't leave me. Like, she didn't leave because she wanted to. She was taken. Like,
Oh
and it
my
was, and so,
gosh.
40 years of his life, he's been thinking this woman walked away when he was 1, and, found out that, she never did. And so that makes a big difference in somebody's
Yeah.
life and someone's perception. So that's
She
kind
was
of the
gone
reward
for
for doing it.
she
The
was
one
gone
thing
for
I
40
like
years.
is that the majority of our cases, the people have been reported missing,
Mm-hmm.
and where they don't seem to match a missing persons, there are agencies where it's like, okay, well, it was in this area, and our law enforcement agency partner will go ask that agency, hey, was this and oh, we don't keep records from that far back.
No.
Before computers, everything was paper records.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those paper records, rather than being computerized, were destroyed.
Mm.
And somebody didn't necessarily have to be found for them to close missing person cases. And we have had cases where it's like, okay, there is no report anywhere, and there should have been. And the family's like, nope, we did it with these people. This is who we reported it to. And so the family thinks, well, there is a missing person case. So if they're found, we'll be contacted.
Mm-hmm.
But somewhere along the line, whatever agency it was sort of dropped the ball and went, okay, this isn't important anymore. It's been 20 years. It's been 30 years.
Yeah.
We've had some we did have the one that was a historic case, but a lot of cases from like the 1980s, and somewhere along the line, things weren't computerized then.
Yeah.
And when it became computerized, not everything was necessarily sent over. We even had a case where, like Chelsea mentioned, we tell them we think this is who it is, and then they have to go and figure out how to prove it, to have a medical examiner sign, yes, this is this person, and here is your death certificate.
Got it.
So there does have to be proof. And I know we had one case where the record they ended up finding was something the Doe had done as a minor. There were fingerprints, but those fingerprints had not been put into a national database. They were still on a card in a police station. And when the law enforcement partner went to the police station and said, hey, would you still happen to have this? They went, oh, yeah, we don't throw things away. Here you go. And they went, oh, this matches.
Got it. That's insane.
So it was able to prove that it was that person. But they do actually have to, after we give them who we believe it is, they do have to go and investigate and prove that that is true. Or, I guess if it ever came up that we were wrong, they would prove that it wasn't true.
Yeah. Chelsea, you were talking about being a researcher. So talk a little bit about how that aids you in this role that you have, and a little bit about the tree building, because in my mind, it's like, here's a name. Okay, here's a potential. Are you like, what does this look like?
Oh, this is my favorite. I could talk about research all day. I low-key just need to be in everyone's business and like know about it. So this is like a
you
great
sound like my
job.
kind of girl.
I love it. I am like, give me the details. So when we're building trees, so we'll start out, what we'll have is like a match. Sometimes it's just an email. Sometimes they're nice and they've given us a name. Sometimes it's just initials. So we're trying to figure out who this match is. So we're using their emails, putting it into Google, trying to find out. And when we're usually like, okay, we're pretty certain this is this person. Usually if I get your birthday, and one way I can get that birthday is going to Facebook and finding out who says happy birthday to you, or happy birthday to your mom, or happy birthday to somebody. And you're like, oh, okay.
I do this just when I'm being nosy. This is great.
I am
Oh
telling
yeah, this
you,
is like internet stalking on steroids. You can, it's great.
Private investigator right here.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh,
This
yeah.
is my kind of girl.
I
Who
mean,
said
yeah.
happy birthday? When is your birthday? You got any
Exactly.
tagged photos? Okay, keep going.
Exactly. So, well, yeah, I mean, I love to find the person on Facebook that's like the family history person that's like, here's grandma, you know, from so on. You're like, oh, grandma who? Grandma Helen? Like, okay, I'm going to add that to my list. And so then you can get a lot of these details. You know, some people that are in GEDmatch are already kind of interested in genealogy, or they're looking, or sometimes more recently they are looking for, you know, they've heard about this as a tool for finding someone that's missing, or trying to connect with them. And they have had their DNA uploaded like in anticipation of that potentially happening. So once you do that, you got to go through through the records, and it's pretty easy. You know, for like if it's the U.S. Census you're looking at, those censuses are great, but we only have access to them for like from 1950s, the most recent one we can see. So if it's just a sort of straightforward case, like, you know, your parents came from Ireland or something like mine did, and you're just tracing them back, and you have some decent matches size that you can go through, you might get back like, you know, to like 1850, maybe we're talking, to like find a common ancestor and go down. If this is something, so if there's records available, like if they immigrated to the US and, you know, you have like an immigration record, like those are really easy to find. It's when sort of sometimes you go back to these other different countries. So one of the things, like, so I have a history degree, like a big moneymaker, right? Like in Russian history, my parents were really thrilled. But I have used it probably more in the last couple of years because like one case I'm on, it was back in the day when, like, you know, the countries were all kind of big blobs of countries, like they didn't have separate borders. So like Russia was like 1,000 different little countries in one. Well, now they've all split. And American, like, you got to have the confidence of an American record taker. They just write down whatever. So they're like, oh, you say that you're from Hungary? Great. We're going to write like Austrian down, like good enough. And then you kind of have to like look at the town maybe. So because I'm like a big nerd, I can be like, oh, that town was actually in Russia during that time because I know that from my, you know, $40,000 bachelor degree that we're using here. And so now I can like have a better idea of what we might need to be looked for, what countries like might need to go. Sometimes like that country's been through a war and there aren't records. And so you kind of have to think outside the box. Sometimes you can't find out who that matches. And then maybe you have to go, who's that person like related to? Do they have anyone in common with my Doe? Like, how do I get at that in a different way? So it's really like a big puzzle. And then I like that part of it. And then, you know, I'm always there for the people that are just like spilling secrets on Ancestry. And they like, a lot of people are working out rage on Ancestry.com, just writing Word documents of like, man, grandma really like had it coming. And then if you get names and stuff, I usually like I said, I do research for some other like true crime podcasts and stuff. So I like the stories. Like I want to hear about the stories. So like I'll go to like the newspapers, and like newspapers.com is like my favorite website ever. They have all these like historical newspapers. So you can put in, if anyone thinks like today is more like immoral or like sinful than it was back in the day, they are so wrong. Like everyone's been doing the same things forever. You'll read these stories and be like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe what this person was involved with. So it's a lot of fun for me.
I know the fact that newspaper.com exists is hilarious. Just, I mean,
that's where you get the best stuff.
But
like,
I'm sure
find out about what people are doing back in the day, like what they were getting up to. So you can find out a lot, and they were definitely like not trying to protect anyone's identity back in the day. They will be like, oh, so-and-so who lived on X street in this town, like left their house today, and like this horrible thing happened. And you'll be like, oh my gosh, well, we didn't probably need like their whole entire life history in there. So you find out a lot, and then it's not like part of what we do, but we like to sort of turn over like what information we do find
Got
to
it.
law enforcement, like
Mhm.
so they get a little head start maybe on what they need to do. And so some of the time, like when we're turning this over, like, you know, sometimes it's like, I don't want to sound like particularly ghoulish, but sometimes it's like, you know, someone's like, they've expired from natural causes. It's not always like some horrible violent
Yeah.
thing. But on other cases, like once we turn it over, it is turning into a homicide investigation, most likely, whether or not they are, you know, the persons that might have done that is alive or not, but they're
Mhm.
going to try to close it. And so one thing I didn't mention, and this is for our people that are scared of like identity and privacy, is that we actually sign NDAs, so non-disclosure agreements with law enforcement. And when we
Oh,
become volunteers, to not talk about it until we're told that we can talk about it.
got it.
Which is why we were only like, I'm trying to watch myself, and I'm sure Stacey is, to like
Oh,
splurting out things. I have a big mouth too. So I, you know, I'm trying to be careful
Yeah.
about what I say, but there's definitely a lot of like stories that you're just like, this is incredible. Like, I can't believe that like this is stranger than fiction.
some of them
Wow.
make excellent novels.
Mm, I
One
believe it.
that my most recent solved case, which has not been a lot, so I can't really say too much about it, except that the family member in that case would probably make a lot of money if they wrote a complete novel. It could be made into a movie. It
Wow.
was that it was that interesting
Mhm.
with so many twists and turns. And you
Hmm.
know, I don't think we've ever had a case where it's like, oh, this is boring. Look,
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure.
cousin on this side, here's a second cousin on this side.
Yeah.
This is where they matched up. Here you go. This is who the person is. And their life was just, you know, like they just had this happy little perfect life, and here they are.
Yeah.
I don't think we've ever come to that. At least I have not. And I
Yeah.
don't recall hearing of any.
I imagine that to be the case. Go ahead.
Are you all services only for missing people, or do people reach out to you just to find their ancestry?
We don't help people find their ancestry. There are several people within the group that do
Hmm.
that. Like I help people find their family trees, particularly if grandpa wasn't actually grandpa. It
Hmm.
was, you know, the guy on the next farm over kind of a thing. Most of us do that as well, but not through the DNA Doe project. We are strictly John and Jane Doe's
John
and
Jado.
getting them their names back.
Okay. I'm interested in finding my lineage now. See if my granddaddy was really my granddaddy.
He was the next farm over. No, this was so interesting. Thank you, first of all, for doing this. I am all in, fascinated. I'm trying to figure out, Stacey, your story you're talking about. I'm like, when is that gonna come out? Let me go check the website.
Oh my goodness. I have
Well, if you like stories like this, we did recently, over the past couple of years, we've been filming a TV show
Oh, nice.
for I think it's coming out on like Disney Plus maybe in like March or April. So
Oh,
it's pushed down a
nice.
couple of times, so it'll follow like I think like 5 or so cases that we worked on, and kind of tell those stories. And there's some good ones, so
Yeah,
keep your eyes open for that.
will
absolutely.
show
Oh,
the
that's
whole
cool.
it will show the process of the tree building.
Okay.
And it shows the process through it.
Oh yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. That's a good tip. I'll be all
Quick
in.
plug.
Last question for me. Is there a certain region of the United States where there's more missing people than others?
There are, and I don't actually have that handy. I know I have looked into that. I know we have a lot in Texas.
I would say right now, if not necessarily missing, but I would say for like the world in general right now, one of the reasons that a lot of our cases are Hispanic or Latino cases are because people are coming over from Central America and Mexico over the border, and unfortunately things are happening on their way. And there are a lot of unidentified remains of people that were, trying to come to the United States, and they have Hispanic or Latino lineages, and those are hard. So if, you do have a family member of that, the more that people upload, the quicker those kind of get resolved. But those are like the bulk of a lot of cases right now.
And
I
those,
think missing people are just interesting anyway.
if they're found sort of at the border, I believe that Mexican authorities actually require you to give them DNA. I think they handle most of those cases. So ours aren't going to be like, at the border.
Got it.
Right. Like Arizona, Texas.
Arizona, Texas, California, it's,
that makes
and then
sense.
when somebody is they're found, they have to kind of look at them and go, oh, does it look like they got immunizations in the United States? Does it look like they had dental work in the United States? And decide, was this a person that was living here, or was this possibly somebody that came over that?
Got it.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. This was interesting, so fascinating. Thank you for lending your time and telling us about the project as well as the cases you've worked on. Is there anything we can tell our audience or listeners to, anything you want to leave them with? Maybe tell them to upload, tell them to, I don't know, anything you want to leave them with.
Absolutely. Upload and opt in on GEDmatch and FTDNA if you have done your DNA through another company. Opt in if you have done your DNA through FTDNA. If you do have a missing person in your family, it's very helpful if you build a public tree. And if you can upload that, you can upload a tree to GEDmatch, and you can name yourself something like, Jane, second cousin of missing person so-and-so. In an ancestry tree or another, several websites do have tree building features. You can put the person in there, and people don't show in those trees if they are living. They do not show publicly. So you have to mark them as deceased. And instead of putting a date, you can say like went missing, whatever the date was.
Got it.
Dead.
Okay.
Or you don't have to put presumed dead if you're, because obviously you might be hoping they're not. But still putting them in there with a went missing date is very helpful.
Got it.
Cool.
Yeah, I would echo all of that, except sometimes we do put out targeted calls for help, like if we have a certain region that we're looking for, or, we maybe have some last names of interest, but we have a tough case or not great matches, and it will ask, share this flyer or do something. Anytime we can get more eyes looking at things, those are helpful. So if you come across even missing things that aren't related to us, give that a share. That's somebody's family member they're looking for, and it is important to them. It might not be important to everyone in the world, but it is someone's loved one, and so that's kind of the reward of doing all of this, is kind of reuniting people and giving them closure.
For sure.
Yes, and I believe we are on, I think
we're on socials,
every social media, I believe, and we have a website, so you can always go to the website. You can see the past cases that have been solved, the cases we're working on. And then in some instances, there are cases that the much smaller law enforcement agencies cannot afford the lab things that have to be done, that like our portion is volunteer and it's free, but the labs still have to be paid and things like that. So there are costs, and there are cases that need funding on there, and you can look at those cases and say, hey, you know what? Yeah, I'd like to do this. And, this specific case, or just for all of the cases and whatever, you can even go to the Facebook button, and there should be, a button on Facebook to donate.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that last tip is really good too. That's how people can, help help in these cases as well. Give you money, give them some funding. So thank you again. We appreciate you both joining us. We will put all of that information, for sure, the socials and the website. I'll make sure we drop those in the description box. And I will let both of you go. Enjoy your Friday. I think it's Friday.
And thank
It
y'all.
is.
Thank you for what you do.
Yeah,
It's-
thank
No
you.
problem. Thank you.
It's appreciated.
Thank you again to our guests for joining us and telling us all about the DNA Doe Project. Thank you for listening. You can follow them and follow me. I'm Not Lawyer But on all the platforms.
Goolsby, GOOLZBY on IG, and Building with Goose on YouTube.
Until next time.
Court is adjourned.